They tried to bury me with him, but only my father had that right. I stood in the vestibule of St. Bartholomew's, damp coat clinging to my wrists, as my stepmother's voice thinned the air. "You should leave, Lena," Elise said, the syllables spotless, like porcelain plates you cannot touch. "This is family." The word pressed against my ribs. The pews were crowded, lilies collapsing into their own sweetness, and my father's photograph stared out from a wooden easel. He was 70, careful with his hands, the kind of man who turned jars so the labels faced forward. He had taught me how to center a nail with a heartbeat. He had taught me to say nothing when words carried blades. My half-brother, Victor, shifted in a black suit that fit like an argument. He had our father's height but none of his quiet. He glanced at the ushers, then at me, and tipped his chin toward the doors. It was not a request. I felt heat rise along the scar at my wrist, a pale seam from a childhood accident in the workshop, the day he steadied the wood and said I would always leave things stronger than I found them. I had left the house 5 years ago, after the fight about the company sale, after he remarried a silver voice with sharp corners. We had not spoken at holidays. We had exchanged cards that smelled like someone else's living room. 2 months ago, he called at dusk and said, "Lena, I have been wrong," the line breaking the same way his breath broke when he lifted something too heavy. I booked a late train that night and sat with him until dawn, in a room humming with machines, the clock hands soft with pity. He asked me for one more promise, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. Elise's nails glittered near the black clutch. "This is not appropriate," she said. "Please go home." "I am home," I said, and the echo caught under the high ceiling. Someone coughed. The priest watched from the sacristy door, eyes mild, like a man waiting for rain to decide whether to fall. Behind me, a gray-haired usher shifted his weight, not moving closer, not moving away. I did not ask for allies. I had learned that real help arrives without flags. I did not leave. I slipped into the last pew, inside the shadow of a column, and let the service begin without me. The organ found its way through the liturgy, the choir loosening the air. I watched the careful choreography, the way grief knows where to stand. My father's name settled over the sanctuary with the weight of 30,000 dinner conversations, 100 summer drives, 1,000 small forgivings. Elise read from Proverbs with a voice that was cool and exact. It was a voice that had tasted every syllable before letting us hear it. Victor delivered a story about the company's early days, about risk and vision, about a father who understood markets better than people. I counted the breaths between his sentences and remembered how our father used to count my steps when I crossed the street, hand in mine, his thumb tapping a metronome on my knuckles. I felt for the envelope in my coat pocket, its sharp corner tucked into the seam. It had lived there for 2 weeks, unbent, sealed with a lawyer's tape and my father's handwriting across the flap. The paper remembered his hand. The paper remembered the truth. I warmed it with my palm, as if it had a pulse, as if it could steady mine. When the pallbearers rose and the aisle opened, I stood with the rest. The coffin moved like a final sentence through the nave, shoulder to shoulder, everything held. Tears found my mouth and salt found my tongue. I tasted the first wound and swallowed it whole. As the doors swung wide and the wind reached for us, I caught Victor's eye. He smirked, as if borders were his to draw. It did not matter. I was not leaving. I had come to keep a promise, and the promise had a name I could already hear, bright and clean, waiting to be said. The cemetery ground gave a little, as if grief made soil softer. I stood back under a leafless ash, watching the huddle of black coats close around the grave like crows. Cold slipped under my collar and threaded my spine. I kept my hands in my pockets, steady on the envelope, steady on the life that would have to open after this one closed. After the priest commended dust to dust, people looked at their shoes and at the weather, small mercies in a season that was stingy. The first shovel of earth struck the lid with a dull, domestic sound. I had heard that sound before, inside apartments where arguments landed, inside factories where iron met iron. It was the sound of a thing finishing the only way it could. Elise ran the reception like a gala. Back at the house, silver trays traveled on the arms of quiet servers, and the foyer held a bouquet that seemed to argue with mortality. I stood near the coat rack and breathed in wool and rain. Anyone who recognized me offered the kind of half-smile you save for supermarket lines. They were kind without sticking their hands into the fire. A cousin introduced me to her new husband, eyes sliding past my name. A deacon nodded at my shoulder, as if I were a wall. Victor moved through the rooms absorbing condolences like tips. He took longer with the men who ran companies, the ones who looked at the home's high ceilings with acquisition in their eyes. It was not grief on his face, it was weather, changing when it needed to. I wandered into my father's study. He had favored order, but the surface of his desk held the mess of last days. A stack of journals, a ceramic cup with 2 pencils, and a small wooden plane, sanded smooth by decades of idle passes. I touched the plane and felt the ghost of a workshop, sawdust rising in summer light, my father's voice steadying a new joint. For a moment I wanted to put my cheek on the desk, to sleep like a child in the shade of the old oak. Footsteps paused at the threshold. "You should not be in here," Elise said, without stepping in. "We are receiving guests." It was his favorite room. She considered me like an itemized deduction. He asked for dignity. He did not ask for spectacle. "I am not a spectacle," I said. "I am his daughter." "There are birth certificates and there are decisions," she replied. "You made yours." I thought of the night I left, the last argument, the word stubborn thrown like a hammer. I thought of the letter he sent a week later, his handwriting crowded with regret, the way he crossed out an entire sentence and wrote, "Try again." We did not then. The years grew vines, and we pretended they were walls. I moved to the window. The winter garden lay like a blueprint, every bed measured and quiet. Mr. Hayes, the gardener, adjusted a stake near the back hedge, his shoulders stiff with age. I lifted the sash 2 inches, enough to let in a drill of cold. "Mr. Hayes," I called, and he looked up, surprise opening his face the way sun opens old paint. "Miss Lena," he said, coming closer, voice winded from decades of carrying water in July. "I am sorry for your father. He was a good man." "He was," I said, and for a moment I let the sentence rest in the shared air. Behind me, Elise rustled like a curtain. "Please shut the window." Mr. Hayes tipped his cap toward the house, then toward me, a quiet benediction. I lowered the sash, heat struggling to reclaim the room. I felt the envelope against my thigh, not heavy, but exact. The house seemed to hum around it, as if the studs knew what the paper held. I stepped closer to Elise, close enough to see the careful line of eyeliner, the expensive discipline. "I will stay for 1 hour," I said. "Then I will go to the office." "To do what?" she said, without the question mark. "To keep a promise." Her smile twitched. "We already have counsel. There will be announcements. Victor understands the obligations." "I am not here for announcements," I said. "I am here for truth." Her mouth thinned to a blade. "You always did like that word." I did not argue. I returned to the hall and took a glass of water from a tray. My throat tasted like a nail. I understood what being unwelcome does, how it shrinks the chair you sit in, how it changes the light. I felt the familiar loneliness settle, the kind that lets you hear your own breath as an instrument. I drank the water and looked at the clock. 50 minutes until I could move the promise from my pocket to the desk where it belonged. I stood straighter and made a quiet vow I had not known lived in me, the kind that wraps around your spine and lifts your head. I vowed to say my father's last intention cleanly, once, and let it stand without shouting. I vowed to leave the room stronger than I found it. 2 weeks earlier, the air in the hospice room smelled faintly of lemon and metal. Machines marked time with small bright blinks, as if life were a lighthouse. My father's hand lay inside mine, paper-thin and warm in spots, his knuckles still square with habit. He watched me the way he used to watch rain gutters during storms, making sure nothing overflowed. "Lena," he said, voice roughened by days of morphine and years of pride, "I kept something wrong." "I am here," I said. "Say it like it needs to be said." He smiled, tired and precise. "You were always better than the mess I made." The door eased open and his attorney, Anita Crowley, stepped in with a folder under her arm. Anita had represented him since I was 14, when a broken contract threatened to turn a summer into ash. She wore a gray sweater and an expression that could carry other people's burdens without scuffing them. She nodded to me, then to him, and sat in the chair that had forgotten its squeak. "We can do this tomorrow," she said. He shook his head, stubbornness made holy by proximity. "Now." He looked at me. "I changed my will again, last month. I had no right to keep silence. I had no right to ask you to hold it. But I am asking." Anita drew a sealed envelope from the folder, thick with papers, edges straight as truth. My name was across the flap in his old engineer's hand, letters square, the R in Hargrave a little flourished, the way he wrote it on my lunch notes in 3rd grade. "Inside," she said, "is a notarized copy of the codicil, a letter from your father explaining his intention, and an audio file on a small drive. He wanted you to deliver this to my office after the funeral, before any announcements are made." I felt the weight of the words draw lines on my palms. "Why me?" "Because you hear things as they are," he said, eyes bright with a father's biography. "Because they will push you away, and you will still walk through the door in one piece." His fingers pressed mine. "Because you do not drink from bitterness." He coughed, and Anita poured him a careful sip of water. The room settled again. The clock tried to keep up. I asked the only question that mattered. "Who did you name?" He took a breath like a decision. "The heir to the company and the house is not Victor," he said. "It is Eli." He watched me as the name landed, as it took a chair and waited for meaning. I knew the name. Eli Mercer, 12, quiet, a patient child with a wheeled backpack and a habit of tracing plant leaves with his finger, as if learning their veins. He lived 3 blocks from the house with his mother, Cass. Our father had mentored him at the community workshop, where boys and girls who needed steadiness learned how to build birdhouses and trust. A year ago Eli's mother had brought a letter from her college days, a tangle of old choices and a paternity test that had waited too long. My father had met the truth like a gentleman, flawed and present. He had been visiting Eli twice a week since August, math on Tuesdays, sanding on Saturdays. I sat back. Silence unfurled like a flag only I could see. It was possible to be surprised and not injured. It was possible to feel your life open in a new direction, a small door in an old corridor. "All right," I said. "I am leaving you trustee over the trust until Eli is 25, he added, as if asking me to hold a ladder. "The board will be reduced and rebuilt. There are letters to employees, structures for a lease, provisions for Victor that are fair, but not flattering. Everything is in order. What is not in order is the way people will feel." He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he looked younger, mischief returning to the blue. "Anita has the filings ready. I want the truth to be the first thing in the room, after I am gone." "I will deliver it," I said. The promise fit my mouth. Anita placed the envelope in my hands like a small infant. "Keep it sealed until you are in my office," she said. "I trust your judgment, but process will matter. There is also a thumb drive. If public denial makes a mess, play the file and let your father speak." He recorded it on a good day. My father looked at me the way men look at the sea. "Forgive me for the late homework," he said, and we both smiled, both knowing that forgiveness had already happened, in the hard quiet hours of his last winter. A week later, he was gone. Now, in the house that smelled like lilies and control, I slid my thumb along the envelope's edge and felt the raised fibers. It was a proof object and a compass. It was a map that did not ask for applause. I tucked it deeper into my coat as footsteps gathered in the hall, as Victor's voice rose above polite noise. Somewhere in the kitchen a tray rattled. Somewhere in the garden, Mr. Hayes straightened a stake and waited for spring. At 10 minutes before the hour, I left the study and joined the current of black coats flowing toward the living room. Elise stood near the fireplace, framed by portraits in taste, a stemmed glass balanced between two fingers. Victor claimed a corner where the light did flattering things to his jaw. Someone lowered the music, and the room obeyed. "Thank you all for coming," Elise said. "We are grateful for your presence as we begin to transition the company and household in accordance with my husband's wishes. Victor will be the point of contact. He has already been in conversation with our council." I felt the old ache of a lie dress itself in velvet. People nodded like metronomes. A man from the board looked almost relieved. A cousin clapped once and stopped, as if applause had entered without an invitation. Anita moved through the crowd with the calm efficiency of a storm shelter. She met my eyes for a breath, then halted 2 feet from Elise. "We will follow process," she said, voice level. "Announcements will be issued tomorrow after filings. For today, let us honor Mr. Hargrave in peace." Elise's smile did not change temperature. "Of course. I am merely orienting our friends." Victor cleared his throat and accepted the room's attention. "I want to say a few words about stewardship," he began. He talked about continuity, about markets, about his father's legacy as if it were a runway for his own plane. The language was smooth and stainless. I watched people absorb it with the gratitude of guests offered a coat rack. I felt Anita's presence next to me, small and solid. "They will not listen today," she whispered, barely a sound. "Tomorrow is enough." "Tomorrow is sufficient," I said, "unless today becomes an injury." Victor was finishing with a sentence that used the word destiny, when Cass Mercer stepped into the doorway, Eli beside her, both in clean thrift store black. Cass had a face that did not apologize for its years. Eli's hands were jammed into his pockets, shoulders rounded, as if protecting a sparrow. They had come to say goodbye in the only room that had ever pretended to be theirs. Elise moved toward them with social grace and a bouncer's intent. "The house is for family today," she said. "We were invited by Mr. Hayes," Cass answered, voice steady. "He said the garden wanted us." "This is not the garden," Elise said, glancing at their shoes. I stepped forward. "They are here because my father wanted them here." I heard the room alter, a small draft through a sealed window. I faced Victor. "And because the truth is here now." He looked amused, which is the cheapest kind of armor. "Lena, please." Anita's hand settled once on my sleeve, not to restrain, only to witness. I reached into my coat and withdrew the envelope. It was not dramatic, only precise. I held it without lifting my voice. "My father executed a codicil naming the heir your announcements forgot," I said. "Mrs. Crowley has the filings. Before the room digs deeper into a story that is wrong, it should hear the name my father chose." Elise's eyes narrowed. "We will not litigate grief in a living room." "We will not," I said. "We will only say the truth cleanly." I turned the envelope toward Anita. She nodded and kept it closed, the formality intact. Then I lifted the small thumb drive and held it between my fingers, a sliver of metal, a clear instrument. "He recorded a message for the family and the board," I said. I crossed to the mantel, where a small speaker waited for background strings, and slid the drive into its side. The device chimed once, as if clearing its throat. My father's voice filled the room, not loud, but certain. "If you are hearing this," he said, "then I have done the thing I should have done in person, and I am asking you to hold your temper the way I taught you to hold a tool." Someone breathed out. The room shifted its weight. He continued, delivering words he had cut and sanded with care. He spoke of mentorship and mistakes, of a letter found and a test that clarified what Hart already knew. He named provision for Elise, respect for her role, and financial structure for Victor, without the crown he assumed. He named stewardship as service, not appetite. Then he said the name that reassembled the walls. "The heir to the company and the house is my son, Eli Mercer," he said. "He will be guided by Lena Hargrave as trustee until he is ready to carry the weight we have all carried differently. I do this because it is right." The room went quiet in a way that is not emptiness, only adjustment. I glanced at Eli. He looked at the carpet, lashes shaking, a child trying not to move in case movement broke the spell. Cass took his hand and did not squeeze, letting him decide what grip he needed. Victor found his anger and dressed it in scorn. "This is ridiculous," he said. "A charity case. Manipulation." Anita lifted the envelope, still sealed, and placed it on the mantel. "The codicil is executed, witnessed, notarized," she said. "You may be angry, but the law will not be." Elise stared at me as if I were a design flaw. "You brought this into my home with strangers at the door." "I brought my father into his home," I said, and let the sentence do its own work. The file ended. For a long breath nothing moved, not even the lilies in their glass prison. Then Mr. Hayes, hat in hand, stepped into the room and bowed his head toward the speaker, the way men used to greet the weight that kept bridges standing. One by one, people found their coats or found their quiet. Justice did not shout. It stood very still, and the house had to learn where to place its furniture around it. The filings went through on a Tuesday so clear it felt rinsed. Overnight the story tilted. The board met in a room that smelled like coffee and new paper, listened to Anita's summary, read the codicil, and voted their compliance like men and women who had finally found the rug that fit the room. There were calls and emails, some shocked, some grateful to be told what to do. There were headlines, polite and dry. In a photograph, Eli looked like a boy standing on a dock, watching a ship approach that he would not board for years. Elise retreated behind curtains and counsel. She received the provisions due to her and kept her chin like a ledger line. I sent a note that said only, "I wish you peace." It did not come back. Victor called, once late, a voice roughened by the discovery that doors can close both ways. "You could have warned me," he said. "It was never mine to warn," I said. "It was his to tell." He did not ask for more. I did not offer it. After we hung up, I placed the phone face down and sat with my hands open on my knees, waiting for anger that did not arrive. Relief came instead, and something gentler, like rain finding the exact path it wants down a window. Anita and I visited Cass and Eli in their apartment with the rattling window. The kitchen table was scrubbed white, and a basil plant leaned toward the glass. Eli held the wooden plane my father had given him, his thumb rubbing the edge. We spoke in practical sentences, maps of years ahead, what trusteeship would mean, which decisions could wait until high school was done and the world had put a little more spine in his shoulders. "We will move slow," I said. "We will make choices that look the same in daylight and midnight. You will not be a mascot. You will be yourself." He nodded, eyes on the plane. "He said I could make mistakes," he murmured. "He said would forgives if you learn how." It was a good sentence to inherit. I felt our father enter the room again, not as a man who made markets, but as a teacher who could watch a child sand an edge until it fit. Weeks passed. The house was appraised and transferred. I walked its rooms one last time with Mr. Hayes, touching doorframes like foreheads, saying goodbye without the theater. We stood in the garden while he pointed out what the winter had done, where the iris would test the soil, how the ash would leaf even after storms tried to convince it to stop. I left him a set of keys for the new season. He put them in his pocket and nodded, the kind of nod that puts certain things to bed. In my apartment, morning came through thin curtains and found the stack of letters I did not send. The basil plant on my sill was smaller than Cass's, but stubborn. I set the little wooden plane beside my mug, a second pulse on the table. The radiator clanked in the living room like a friend climbing the stairs. I made tea and watched steam find the cold. It felt, at last, like a ceremony I could afford. Trusteeship turned out to be a humble craft. I kept minutes in calendars, translated jargon into plain speech, and became a bridge that did not ask to be praised for being strong. When Eli visited the workshop, I stood back and listened. His laughter found the corner where once I had taped a poster of a kite, believing anything could lift if you asked the wind politely. Now I believed something different and better. The wind does not take orders. It responds to the shape you make. On the first warm Saturday, we met in the workshop yard. Eli planed a cedar strip with the focus of a violinist tuning, his curls catching the light. Shavings piled like cinnamon at his feet. Cass sat on the step with a book, reading one paragraph for every 5 she watched him instead. It looked like a family the way families are made, by turning toward what keeps them honest. I closed my eyes and saw the moment in the living room when my father's voice finished its work, when the room learned a new map. Justice had not cut anyone open. It had stood in the center and refused to move. People rearranged themselves around it, and no blood was needed. That night I opened the last of the cardboard boxes from my old life. At the bottom lay a photograph of me at 8, sitting on the workbench, sawdust in my hair, my father's hand steady on my shoulder. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, it said, "He belongs to his careful girl." I held it in the kitchen light and felt something loosen where the winter had pinned it. I slid the photo into the drawer with the tea and the stamps and the small cords that keep machines in conversation, as if keeping that memory near the tools might teach it new ways to be useful. Peace is not loud. It is a basin you fill, one pitcher at a time. The basin stood on my table, the room held its breath, and I knew the work now was to keep filling it, unremarked and steady. The story people wanted was a scandal. The story I will keep is softer. A man tried to use the time he had left to repair what he had left undone. A daughter kept her promise. A boy learned the names of trees and the angles of stewardship. A house found a new owner, and a garden prepared to forgive winter again. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. And subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge.